What a journey. If you're watching this final video, I thank you very much for hanging in there. This is really just a wrap up, a summary, but I did want to take the opportunity to convey a couple of cautions, warnings, and if you've had trouble or no success at all getting your mount to work with Stellarium, I'll talk about some troubleshooting things maybe that you can try. And I want to suggest that you do a commissioning period. I think that's good. Again, I think a lot of people want to use their mount, I was going to say outside, but they want to be inside and not like close to the mount. So if you were sitting in your living room and you're monitoring the mount and you do a slew command and you go to, wait a minute, that's kind of weird what it's doing. You might realize sitting there, I'm going to have a collision. The camera is going to hit the tripod. And how quickly can you get outside, and shut things off or take control of the mount? So do careful testing over the next little while to make sure it works. Now, a lot of times communication problems, in the end, I've learned from my IT experience and networking and electronics and so on, it's almost always the wire. If you can't get Stellarium to connect with the mount, double check all your cabling. You've got the correct cables, correct pinouts, stuff like that. If you bought a USB serial adapter, test it with another device if you can. So verify each leg of the connection. If you're using Wi-Fi, use the Wi-Fi to interconnect different devices, see if they talk to each other. So lots of things to check the cabling and the connections. Are the cables strayed? Have they been bent or cut or damaged? All those usual things to check. In Windows in particular, when you connect and disconnect the USB serial adapter, a lot of times the COM port changes. I've shown you in the device manager that you can look it up and check it. So a lot of times I expected it to be one thing and it changed on me. What was I thinking about? Different sequences there. I've heard about this. I've not experienced this, but I've heard about some people that have lots of USB devices going, maybe a camera, a guider, USB adapter for the mount, and lots of things connected to the computer. Works fine one time and then not the next evening. And it could be that the sequence in which things were connected is the issue. I've heard about that people go, the only way it works is if I connect my camera first, then the mount, then the guider. When I do it in that sequence, it works. But if I do the guider first and then the camera and the mount, it doesn't work. So sometimes you have to do a bunch of trials there to figure out what's the right sort of sequence through that. There's firmware in your hand controller. There's firmware that may update the driver motor control circuitry in your mount. So usually the normal advice is to update your firmware, make sure it's correct, because the old one could be buggy. That said, new firmware could introduce bugs. So you want to be able to do some form of testing to make sure it's working okay. In ASCOM, there's a diagnostic tool that you can use to sort of test the environment. I've used that a couple of times. There's a lot of technical stuff to interpret there. I would assume Indy has a similar sort of thing that you can do diagnostic or test to make sure that things are working okay there. In the end, though, you may exhaust all of your options in terms of troubleshooting and going through fault trees and so on. So you're going to want to reach out. You can ask me, I can try to help, but I don't have lots of mounts here. I don't have lots of different computers. I don't have lots of different software. I used to have a lot of Macintosh computers. I killed my Linux machine. So I can't test on a lot of different environments. I can only give general advice. But reach out to your astronomy club or your astronomy center. Maybe somebody's got a similar setup there. But in general, I would suggest you got to go international. If you reach out on groups like Cloudy Nights or Stargazers Lounge or the indie groups or the ASCON groups, you're reaching out internationally, and there's a good chance that somebody on the planet has the same telescope, the same mount, the same version of Stellarium, a similar, if not identical, USB adapter, same kind of cabling. They've maybe run into some of these problems before. So reach out as far as you can, cast the net wide internationally if you can, to get information from a large community. I talked about some of these limitations already, but let's recap here that there's no stop or cancel button in the Move Telescope box. That seems odd to me. Maybe I'll send a note to the developers. I think that would be a good idea. But in the meantime, you need to be comfortable with and ready to issue the keyboard shortcut to cancel a slew. So be ready for that. Did you notice that nowhere on the screen did we see little buttons for slewing up, down, left, and right? I just think about everything that's on my hand controller, that we don't have these buttons on the screen anywhere. So you can't do fine tuning, positioning, slewing a little bit left and right. You don't have a rate control to control the speed of it. So a lot of times I'm doing that. I'm looking through the eyepiece and I go, oh, that's a lovely galaxy. Oh, there's something fuzzy at the edge of the field. So I just want to pan or shift a little bit. I mean, in Stellarium, you can use the slew to the center of the screen, but you're going to have to be a bit tricky and sort of think about the math of it or the angles to get that to work right. So we don't have a full controller. We can't change tracking rates per se. That's an odd thing. When you slew to the middle of the screen, you're going to the location at the moment you hit the slew command. But what you're interested in could have drifted away if you waited too long. So it's just going to the location at that moment. That's all. That's different. When I slew to the moon with my hand controller, it switches me into lunar tracking rate. It just does that automatically. There's no tracking rate controls or anything like that. When I do special projects, a lot of times I want to shut the tracking off and let things drift and then turn it back on. There's no control in Stellarium for doing that. So you're probably still going to have to do a lot of things on the hand controller when you're doing special stuff. Now, if you're doing visual observing and you're sitting at the telescope, big deal. It's not that big a deal. But if you're in the house and you're trying to do a little pan, no easy way to do that. So keep that in mind. I cautioned you already about collisions and cable strain and stuff like that. So I would recommend again that you do thorough commissioning, that you move the scope in lots of different ways. You go through startup shutdown processes a few times and make sure it's working okay. And you want to be aware of the limits and the cable pathways, that there's no sort of problems there. Stellarium does not have limit controls in it. So you need to be really aware of how far you can move the mount, up, down, left, and right. You got to be aware of that. People that have an observatory, permanent sort of facility, I've seen some people set up a low light camera, aiming at the telescope. And while you're slewing, you could have a little camera display on your computer and watch where the mount is going. And if you see something weird happen, you can issue a slew keyboard shortcut, a cancel keyboard shortcut to try and stop it. Now, some people really are dismayed by that, so they want to get a virtual hand controller. That's beyond the scope of these videos, but I just wanted to remind you of options that are available. You might use Stellarium Scope. That's an old tool. You might use Next Remote. I've used that with the Nexstar 11. I just heard about the SynScan app. It's pretty impressive, actually. It's a neat app for a mobile device. With the EQ mod, there's a whole bunch of additional EQ bits, and you can have a virtual hand controller there. So there might be some other way to sort of do that or manage that. But Stellarium itself doesn't offer any sort of hand controller. If you're using ASCOM or Indie, you might have options there. You may have additional controls associated with the ASCOM mount driver. So do some reading, investigate that. My Vixen Sky Sensor 2000, no extra features. It's a very minimal driver. Anyway, I hope you've seen that it's doable. You've seen my solution specifically, and I have a weird setup. But in theory, if you've got current modern sort of equipment, the right cabling, you should be able to slew your mount. But there's little gotchas along the way. You might need some drivers. You might have to identify ports. You might have to do trials and experiments if you have an unusual mount to find a driver that works. And the Vixen Sky Sensor works for me, but it's only limited support. I can't do everything. The syncing doesn't work for me. Lots of software that you have to set up. There's preliminary stuff. Load your ASCOM and Indy first. Make sure you've got the right Stellarium 32-bit, 64-bit. Load USB drivers first, then connect your devices. Verify your communication ports. Make sure that the telescope control is active inside Stellarium, and then you can build a mount profile. And then on a session-by-session basis, start up your mount as per normal. Remember, the mount needs to be running in a normal state on standby. And then you can go into your telescope control, connect or start. While you're there, double check the number assigned to the profile, and then you can use your keyboard shortcuts or the move button or some other technique, and you're on your way to having a good observing session. Here's some links for you if you're not aware of these websites already, but various software bits here, and toot my own horn a little bit. If you go into my Lumpy Darkness blog, that's blog.lumpydarkness.com, and then you use the tag in the word cloud Stellarium, you'll find all my notes about Stellarium. So I'm regularly commenting in it. I have a separate Evergreen page as well. And if you're a Toronto Centre member of the Royal Astronomical Society, or you're a member of RASC in Canada, we offer Stellarium training courses at multiple levels, and occasionally we run webinars, so you can learn more about Stellarium. So we're wrapping up here. This section was just about some cautions and considerations here, and if you need more control, you might need a virtual controller here, or if you're sitting beside the scope, it's maybe moot. But thank you for watching all these videos, onward and upwards. And if you do have questions, I've put my email address there. I'm trying to reach out, and no promises, but I'll listen to your query, and maybe I can spot a problem or give some suggestions. So thanks for watching all these videos. It's been a long journey, but we made it.